At the height of his career, Dan Blocker appeared to have achieved what most actors spend their entire lives chasing: security, admiration, and a role so iconic it felt permanent. His name was synonymous with warmth. His face was familiar in millions of homes. His presence felt dependable, like something that would always be there. There was no visible warning sign. No public decline. No scandal. No whispered rumors of struggle. Everything seemed stable. And that is precisely what made the ending so unsettling. How does a life that looks so solid vanish almost overnight? How does someone so present suddenly become a memory? The tragedy of Dan Blocker was not simply that he died, it was the quiet that followed. Hollywood, a place that thrives on spectacle, noise, and narrative closure, was left with none. His wife, Dolphia, refused interviews, rejected publicity, and avoided the spotlight entirely. Instead of turning grief into performance, she chose disappearance. In doing so, she left behind one of Hollywood's most haunting silences, a story that never received a final act. And perhaps that silence says more than any interview ever could. A giant with a gentle soul. To millions of viewers, Dan Blocker was Hoss Cartwright. Hoss was the emotional anchor of Bonanza. He was the one you trusted. The one who felt safe. The one who didn't need to prove anything. While Little Joe drew attention with charm and swagger, Hoss captured hearts through sincerity. He was awkward without being foolish, strong without being cruel, emotional without shame. In an era when masculinity was often portrayed as dominance or stoicism, Hoss was something radically different. But how much of Hoss was acting, and how much was Dan Blocker himself? Dan Blocker was born in 1928 in Texas, weighing an astonishing 14 pounds, one of the largest recorded births in the region at the time. From the moment he entered the world, he stood out. His family lost nearly everything during the Great Depression, forcing them to move into the back of a grocery store just to survive. Even as a child, Dan was different. Larger than everyone else. Louder. Stronger. But not cruel. He carried supplies for neighbors. Helped wherever help was needed. People didn't know what to make of him at first, until they realized he was gentle. Saturday nights in his small Texas town became informal strength contests. Locals challenged him to wrestling matches, lifting competitions, or feats of endurance. According to Blocker himself, he never lost. By his teenage years, he weighed over 275 pounds and stood well over 6 feet tall. Yet beneath the physical presence was a thoughtful, curious mind, one that loved reading, philosophy, and conversation. Why do we so often mistake physical size for intellectual simplicity? And why did Blocker spend his life quietly defying that assumption? From football fields to theater stages. For a time, Blocker believed his future lay in football. His size made him a natural linebacker, and he earned a scholarship that seemed to guarantee a sports career. On the field, he was powerful and disciplined. Coaches admired him. Scouts noticed him. But fate has a way of intervening quietly. One day, a college drama club needed someone strong enough to move heavy stage props. Blocker volunteered, expecting nothing more than manual labor. Then someone asked him to step on stage. That single moment altered the course of his life. For the first time, he felt seen not for his size, but for his presence. What happens when you discover your real purpose by accident? And how many people miss that moment because they're too busy following expectations? Blocker switched his major to theater, turned down professional football offers, and committed himself fully to acting. He immersed himself in classical texts, studied Shakespeare, and worked in repertory theater. He even appeared in King Lear, a role that demanded emotional depth far beyond physical strength. Yet just as his path was becoming clear, history intervened. The war no one talks about. In 1950, Dan Blocker was drafted into the U.S. Army and sent to the Korean War. He served as a sergeant on the front lines for over 200 consecutive days, an extraordinary stretch even by wartime standards. During one brutal ambush, his unit was surrounded deep in enemy territory. When a fellow soldier was wounded and trapped, Blocker refused to retreat. He held his position under relentless fire for more than 4 hours, returning fire against machine guns and mortar attacks. The wounded soldier did not survive. But others did, because Blocker stayed. He was eventually hospitalized for combat injuries and returned home in 1952, forever changed by what he had seen. Why is this chapter of his life so rarely discussed? Why is a man remembered for television, almost never remembered for bravery? Perhaps because Blocker never spoke about it. Those who served under him described him as fearless but compassionate, loud in spirit yet deeply protective of others. In war, he wasn't performing. He wasn't acting. He was leading. And when he came home, he carried that experience quietly, never allowing it to define him publicly. Family before fame. After the war, Blocker married Dolphia Parker, the woman who would remain his anchor for the rest of his life. Together they had 4 children and built a home defined not by ambition, but by stability. He earned a master's degree in dramatic arts and became a teacher, first in Texas and later in New Mexico. His students remembered him not as intimidating, but as warm, patient, and deeply invested in their growth. He loved teaching. He loved family. Fame was not part of the plan. Eventually, the family moved to California, not to chase Hollywood dreams, but for education. Blocker enrolled at UCLA to pursue a PhD and continued teaching while studying. Acting remained secondary. But money was tight. So he began auditioning. The accidental star. Television in the 1950s was overflowing with westerns. Blocker's size made him impossible to ignore. Casting directors remembered him immediately. He appeared in Gunsmoke, The Rifleman, Maverick, and even a Three Stooges short. Ironically, he nearly missed out on one of cinema's greatest films. His agent turned down a role in Dr. Strangelove, a decision that would become legendary in Hollywood circles. Then came Bonanza. At first, the show struggled. It was expensive, filmed in color, and initially performed poorly in ratings. NBC nearly canceled it after its first season. Only a time slot change saved it. And then something remarkable happened. The show exploded. Bonanza became one of the most successful television series in history. And Hoss Cartwright became its emotional core. The illusion of simplicity. What made Hoss unforgettable wasn't humor alone, it was emotional safety. He was big, but never threatening. Strong, but never cruel. He felt like someone you could trust without explanation. Yet Dan Blocker himself was nothing like the character. In real life, he was highly educated, politically liberal, deeply religious, and intellectually sharp. He supported civil rights, progressive causes, and believed strongly in moral responsibility. He challenged stereotypes quietly, refusing to perform ignorance for acceptance. So why did audiences assume he was simple? Because he made kindness look effortless. Blocker once admitted that early in the show, he struggled to separate himself from Hoss. He studied the character so deeply that their identities blurred. Only years later did he learn how to step out of the role at the end of the day. Still, Hoss never fully left him. Can an actor ever truly escape the role that defines them? And should they even try? The sudden ending. In 1972, Dan Blocker died unexpectedly from a pulmonary embolism following routine surgery. He was only 43 years old. No farewell episode. No public goodbye. No preparation. The cast of Bonanza was shattered. The show continued, but something essential was gone. Hoss was written out, but the emotional gravity he provided could not be replaced. Audiences felt it. So did the actors. But the most striking response came from Dolphia. She vanished. No interviews. No memoirs. No Hollywood retrospectives. She raised their children privately and refused to participate in the public consumption of her husband's death. Why do some people grieve in silence while the world demands spectacle? And when did mourning become something owed to strangers? Her choice deepened the mystery of Blocker's passing. There was no closure, only absence. The legacy of a gentle giant. Dan Blocker is remembered as a television icon. But his true legacy reaches far beyond the screen. He was a war hero who never spoke about it. A scholar who played a fool. A giant who embodied gentleness. In a world that often confuses strength with dominance, Blocker represented something rare: strength as protection, masculinity without cruelty, presence without ego. Perhaps that is why Hoss Cartwright still feels real decades later. Not because he was perfect, but because he felt human. And maybe that is the greatest performance of all. The gentle giant behind the legend. What does it really mean to live a meaningful life? Is it fame, success, recognition, or something far quieter and deeper? Dan Blocker often carried a quote from an 18th-century Quaker missionary. If there is any kindness to be shown, or any good to be done, it should be done now, because we only pass this way once. That idea wasn't decorative. It guided how he lived, how he worked, and how he treated others. On screen, millions saw Hoss Cartwright. Off-screen, those who knew him saw something rarer still, a man who believed in decency when no one was watching. And perhaps the most powerful question of all remains unanswered. How many people with fame actually live by the values they portray? Dan Blocker did. And when he disappeared, he left behind something Hollywood rarely produces. A silence that still echoes. Dan Blocker was the kind of man people noticed before they knew his name. He was physically imposing, well over 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered, with a presence that seemed to fill whatever space he occupied. Yet what struck people most was not his size, but how deliberately he refused to use it. In an industry built on ego, intimidation, and image, Blocker carried himself with a quiet restraint that felt almost out of place. On the set of Bonanza, that contrast became legend. During one filming session, while cameras rolled and crew members shouted cues over the dusty Nevada terrain, Blocker was thrown violently from a horse. The fall was bad enough that anyone watching winced. He hit the ground hard, his body twisting unnaturally, pain flashing across his face for just a second before it disappeared behind that familiar calm. The diagnosis was clear, a fractured collarbone. Most actors would have been rushed straight to the hospital. Insurance paperwork, delays, reshoots, Hollywood was used to accommodating injuries, especially to stars. But Blocker didn't wave anyone over. He didn't shout. He didn't dramatize. Instead, he did something that still sounds almost unbelievable today. He set the bone himself. With the same steady hands that had once carried rifles in war zones and books in quiet libraries, he adjusted his own injury, climbed back onto the horse, and finished the scene. Only after the day's work was complete did he agree to seek medical attention. No speech. No heroics. No applause-seeking gesture. Just duty. What kind of person does that? And why, in a culture that rewards spectacle, did his strength always show up in such understated ways? Ironically, during his recovery he gained weight, a side effect of immobility and medication. When he returned to the set, the very horse that had thrown him could no longer carry him. The animal struggled, hooves shifting uncomfortably beneath his added mass, until the handlers gently pulled it aside. Blocker laughed. He didn't take offense. He didn't feel embarrassed. He saw the humor in it, even the symbolism. The moment captured something essential about him, resilient without arrogance, self-deprecating without bitterness, quietly strong without needing to prove it. But the most enduring scars in Dan Blocker's life were never physical. The war that changed everything. Long before he became Hoss Cartwright, the gentle giant of the Ponderosa, Dan Blocker had been a soldier. He rarely spoke about his time in the Korean War. Not because it wasn't significant, but because it was too significant. Those years marked him in ways no script ever could. Though he had been decorated for his service, he didn't display medals or tell stories at dinner parties. The war lived inside him, not in anecdotes. Before Korea, Blocker enjoyed hunting. Like many young men of his generation, he saw firearms as tools, even symbols of independence. After Korea, that changed completely. He owned no guns. None. Friends noticed the shift, though few understood it. When asked why, he would sometimes explain, but never lightly. One night during the war, sitting alone on a mountain, surrounded by darkness and silence punctured only by distant sounds of conflict, something inside him broke open. He realized how utterly powerless a human being becomes when someone else holds a weapon. It wasn't a cinematic revelation. No swelling music. Just a cold, terrifying clarity. The illusion of control vanished. Strength, size, courage. None of it mattered when a bullet could erase everything in an instant. From that moment on, he despised firearms. Even though Bonanza revolved around guns, outlaws, and frontier justice, Blocker wanted nothing to do with violence in his real life. He wouldn't allow his sons to go hunting. He spoke openly about his discomfort with the idea of killing animals for sport, once remarking that unless the animals could shoot back, Calling it sport made no sense. So here was the contradiction that defined him. On screen, he played a man of violence. Off-screen, he rejected violence entirely. And maybe that's exactly what made his performance so powerful. He understood the cost of violence, not as a concept, but as a lived experience. When Hoss hesitated before drawing a gun, when his voice softened instead of hardened, audiences felt it. They trusted him. They sensed that this wasn't a man glorifying force, but one who understood its weight. Isn't it often those who have seen the worst who crave peace the most? A real family in a fake industry. Hollywood is not known for genuine friendships. It's known for alliances, rivalries, and relationships that dissolve as soon as relevance fades. Yet on the set of Bonanza, something rare took root. A real family. Blocker formed deep bonds with his co-stars, especially Michael Landon and Lorne Greene. The three men could not have been more different in temperament. Greene carried the gravity of a patriarch, Landon burned with youthful intensity, and Blocker anchored them both with warmth and humor. Michael Landon, in particular, was often labeled difficult. He argued with producers. He pushed boundaries. He cared, sometimes too much. Many saw ego. Blocker saw something else entirely. He saw passion. He believed Landon's stubbornness came not from arrogance, but from an almost painful commitment to doing the work right. Where others rolled their eyes, Blocker defended him. Where tensions flared, Blocker mediated, not with authority, but with empathy. The cast spent long days together, 5 days a week, often from dawn until night. Yet even after grueling shoots, they chose to spend time together. Barbecues. Conversations. Shared laughter. The lines between work and life blurred in the best possible way. Their bond became so deep that Blocker served as best man at Landon's wedding, a role that spoke volumes about trust and affection. Despite his massive popularity, Blocker never chased film stardom. He appeared in a few movies alongside Frank Sinatra, but Hollywood films never pulled him away from television. Bonanza wasn't just a job, it was a community. Hoss wasn't just a role, it was a responsibility. Back in his hometown of O'Donnell, Texas, people still remembered him as the quiet boy who always carried a book. Watching him ride across the Ponderosa every Sunday night felt surreal to those who had known him before fame. He wasn't just comic relief. He wasn't just the big guy. He became a symbol of decency in a harsh world. And behind that symbol stood a man who genuinely believed in kindness. In an industry obsessed with image, how rare is it to find authenticity that lasts? The star who never wanted to be one. By the mid-1960s, Dan Blocker had everything most actors dream of: fame, respect, financial success, and a character beloved across generations. And he didn't want any of it. He loved acting. He loved storytelling. He loved the craft. But he hated being recognized. Fame, to him, felt invasive, like a constant interruption of real life. While other stars moved into gated mansions and flaunted their success, Blocker and his wife, Dia Parker, chose a modest home in Northridge. It was comfortable, not extravagant. Warm, not flashy. Acting, in Blocker's mind, was a job, not an identity. Strangers grabbing his arm. Fans hugging him without permission. Autograph seekers appearing everywhere, even during private moments. Each interaction chipped away at something he valued deeply: privacy. But the hardest part wasn't what fame did to him. It was what it did to his children. Simple family outings became public events. Ice cream trips turned into photo opportunities. Quiet moments dissolved under curious stares. Childhood became a performance they never agreed to. So here's the uncomfortable question. What's the real price of fame when it costs you your normal life? At home, Blocker was playful and ridiculous. He would burst through the door and race his sons to their electric racetrack, using his massive frame to exaggerate movements, intentionally losing just to make them laugh. He wasn't Hoss Cartwright there. He was just Dad. He owned nice cars, a pool, a stable income. But there was no Hollywood excess. No ego-driven purchases. No need to prove anything. Even his closest friends weren't celebrities. They were teachers, old classmates, people who knew him before success ever entered the picture. Because he didn't want to become someone new. He wanted to remain himself. And in a world that constantly pressures us to reinvent for approval, how many people have the courage to resist? Escaping Hollywood without running away. Eventually, Blocker made a decision few stars ever would. He left. Not just Hollywood, but America itself. Inspired by a National Geographic article, he and Dia traveled through Switzerland and northern Italy. It was meant to be temporary. An escape. A break. But when they reached Lugano, something shifted. It wasn't just beautiful. It felt peaceful. No paparazzi. No autograph seekers. No strangers demanding pieces of him. And the greatest irony of all? Bonanza aired in German. In Italian-speaking Lugano, almost no one watched it. For the first time in years, Dan Blocker wasn't Hoss Cartwright. He was just Dan. He walked freely, sat in cafes, watched his children grow in anonymity. He blended into the background, exactly where he wanted to be. The move cost him more money, not less. Taxes were higher. Travel was harder. Career momentum slowed. But money wasn't the point. The point was freedom. And that raises a powerful thought. What does success mean if you have to escape it to survive? The sudden ending no one expected. In 1972, Blocker returned to the United States for what would become Bonanza's final season. Something wasn't right. He felt weak. Exhausted. His body, once so dependable, felt heavy in unfamiliar ways. Doctors diagnosed gallbladder issues and recommended surgery. Routine. Low risk. Nothing alarming. The operation appeared successful. He went home relieved, finally free from years of pain. Hours later, he collapsed. A pulmonary embolism, a blood clot, had traveled to his lungs. Dan Blocker died suddenly at just 43 years old. One moment alive. The next gone. Friends were shattered. Castmates stunned. Fans struggled to comprehend the loss. His children lost their father overnight, a man larger than life reduced to memories far too soon. The man who survived war, broken bones, and physical extremes was taken by something no one saw coming. Isn't it cruel how life often spares us the dangers we fear, only to surprise us with the ones we don't? Dia's quiet goodbye. After his death, Dia Parker faced a choice. She could stay in the spotlight, tell the story, build a public image of her own. Many would have understood, even encouraged it. She chose silence. She never remarried, never sought attention, never capitalized on fame. She raised her children privately, just as Dan would have wanted, shielding them from the very world he had tried so hard to escape. And when she passed away years later, she did so quietly too. No spectacle. No headlines. Just dignity. The legacy that still matters. Dan Blocker didn't chase stardom. He didn't build monuments. He didn't crave attention. He built something rarer. A life rooted in values. Kindness over aggression. Privacy over applause. Loyalty over ambition. Peace over power. In a world obsessed with being seen, he wanted to disappear. And maybe that's why his story still resonates. Because deep down, many of us wonder the same thing. If we had everything, what would we choose? More attention or more peace?